Welcome to Architrave Gaming. I'm the Archmaster. This is just for the 4D crowd. This is a follow-up to one of my previous videos, what is 3.76D role-playing? Yes, the meme. This is, actually, more technically, a follow-up to the conversation I had with Bacon the other day. This is a further development of what I was trying to say at the time. I didn't have the vocabulary at the time because I had just started developing the vocabulary for this because I just started actually 4D role-playing and really thinking about this. But as soon as I was done with Bacon, I talked to my wife and I was explaining stuff and I was like, wait a minute, why didn't I just say it like this and that? So here's a follow-up video. Alright, so the crux of the issue that I have with co-creation, in all its forms, even though I technically, allow, even though I technically approve of a very small amount of co-creation that I would call co-rendering, but even then, all of it falls under the same method, I suppose. That they all have the same DNA, and so here's the issue that I have with this concept of co-creation. I didn't have the words for it at the time, but co-creation violates something I call fundamental diegesis, and I can't believe that I didn't say diegetic immersion when I was talking with Bacon, because I use diegetic everywhere, talking about everything, and when Bacon was asking me about in-character immersion, I should have said diegetic immersion. That's one of the correct, that's one of the big things that I care about a lot, is that a simple workable definition for what diegesis means right now, what I mean by it, is the congruence, the agreement, the aligning of the character's experience and the player's experience, that both of them are experiencing the same thing, right? To me, diegesis is the heart and soul of immersion. Diegesis is what it means to feel like you're in another world, right? And so the problem I have with co-creation is that it violates what I call fundamental diegesis, right? And this contrasts with primary diegesis. I'll explain what I call primary diegesis. An example of diegesis that I often hear is something like you're going to a movie theater and you see a scene where there's music being played in the movie, and so the main character is hearing that music, but you, the viewer, are also hearing the music, right? Your experience matches the character's experience, right? It is diegetic music, right? That's different from if you are hearing some soundtrack playing, but the characters in the world aren't hearing that soundtrack. That is non-diegetic, right? So my whole thing is that immersion, you feeling like the character, means you try to align your experiences with the character's experiences as much as possible. And also your thoughts with the character's thoughts as much as possible, right? Immersion, diegesis, they all play into each other. That's the goal. That's what I'm going for, right? So again, that's primary diegesis. The problem I have with co-creation is that it violates the second kind, called fundamental diegesis, right? Fundamental diegesis is made up of, so far, in the couple days I've been thinking about it, at least two axioms. So these two axioms, these two facts of fundamental diegesis, are essentially things that are true about the world, right? So when I mean fundamental, I mean like universal diegesis, or like, it's not necessarily a diegetic specific experience. It's more of like the framework that humans run on. It's more like the framework, like this is how the world works. This is how real life works, right? So, you could call it realism, but the term realism carries a lot of other baggage. If I say, oh, I want my game to be realistic, people will have all sorts of ideas of what I mean by that, right? So I'm using a new term, fundamental diegesis, which means it fundamentally feels real, or it fundamentally agrees with our real experience. Again, so if you have something in a setting, in a fictional world, and it acts a certain way, you want that to feel diegetic. You want to say, oh, that experience matches my experience. These are the same, right? Diegesis, the two experiences, the fictional one and the real one, line up, right? I know that's a tweaking of how the term diegesis is technically used, which is why I'm not just saying diegesis, I'm saying fundamental diegesis. It's a specific thing. The first fact is that the world is pre-existent. That is the first fact of fundamental diegesis. When you're walking around throughout the day, you know that the whole world is already there. You're not making it up as you go. No one else is making it up as they go. God isn't making it up as he goes. It's already pre-existent. From our very earliest years, we have known that the world is pre-existent. Even if I haven't seen the entire world, I have seen enough evidence to know that the world is pre-existent. Everything is already there, okay? Therefore, in order for a fictional experience to have the same level of realism, to feel real to my psyche, it must also be pre-existent. And again, I don't have to see every detail of the world, but I must see sufficient evidence to be convinced that it is a pre-existent world. I can look at the rule book and look through the page and say, oh wow, this is a pre-existent world. Or in a high trust game, my arbiter can simply tell me, hey, I fleshed everything out. This is a pre-existent world. And if I trust him, boom, now his fictional world feels real in the same way that our real life world feels real. I say, the real life world is pre-existent and the fictional world is pre-existent. Fictional world is like real world. It feels real, right? Whereas if it's not pre-existent, my mind will say, ping, like, oh, hold on, wait a minute. This doesn't match our experience of what reality is. We're trying to treat this like it's real. We're trying to make this believable. Like, we're trying to be immersed in this as if it was a real experience. Yeah, I don't think so. It's not pre-existent. Only real, real things are pre-existent, right? If it's not pre-existent, it's not real, right? That's the cognitive, it's not dissonance, but that's the cognitive red flag that I'm trying to avoid, right? I don't want the mind to ping the fictional world as, not real, not believable, not substantive, because it's not pre-existent, right? It has to be pre-existent. Second point, the second axiom of fundamental diegesis, right? Where the experience of the fictional world matches our experience of the real world. We say, oh yeah, that is how the real world works. This fictional thing must also be real, right? That's what I mean by diegesis. It's like world diegesis, you could say, instead of personal, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, the second fact is that the world is immutable to our editing circuit. And now I'll have to actually tell you what that means. This is a further development of what I was talking about with Bacon. When I talked about with Bacon, when I spoke with Bacon, I had only really conceptualized two circuits. I said, here's the recall circuit and the creative circuit. And then as we were talking, he was saying, okay, well, if you put something in the room, that's the creative circuit. And I couldn't really argue because it's like, well, it's not the recall circuit, it must be the creative circuit. But then creative, in the middle of the conversation with him, I was like, well, maybe it shouldn't even be called creative because you're not generating anything, right? So I was still developing it. Right after I was done, like within an hour, I thought, wait a minute, the proper term for this other circuit is the editing circuit. Not generative, not creative, it's the editing circuit. And then I was also drawing a distinction between like an intentional, voluntary conjuring up of information via this creative circuit, now called an editing circuit, drawing a distinction between that and the GM simply describing something and the images popping into your head automatically. But I didn't have a word for it yet, so now I have the whole thing. All right, here it is. You have three major circuits. You have the discovery circuit, the recall circuit, and the editing circuit, okay? The discovery circuit is involuntary. In real life, our discovery circuit is activated when we see things, when we hear things, etc. All of our absorbing of information, when we discover the world around us, that uses our discovery circuit. It is involuntary. When you open your eyes and you look at something, you see all of the things that you see involuntarily. They just come into your eyes, your brain automatically makes sense of what it sees, and then you perceive that, right? You don't have to decide to see a horse, right? You just see a horse because a horse is there, okay? The recall circuit is, or can be, both voluntary and involuntary. It can be used one way or the other. So you can involuntarily recall information if someone, describes something, or if someone, tells you something and you say, oh yeah, that reminds me of this, right? You didn't intentionally try to recall that. You were reminded of it automatically, unintentionally, involuntarily. Of course, you can also voluntarily use your recall circuit and voluntarily recall information that you have previously garnered through your discovery circuit, right? Thirdly is the editing circuit, right? Again, I might also have to rename this later and whatnot, but editing is the best I have for now. This is the one where you imagine something, okay? You imagine something that isn't there. And no, I don't want to call it the imagination circuit because technically all of these are part of your imagination, right? But it's that circuit, it's the editing circuit. So, if you're walking through a green field and you imagine a steel and concrete building there, a skyscraper, right? You're seeing it in your mind's eye. You can even be seeing it in the field. Like you can have a very good imagination and see that it's there, right? And you see that because, you're a construction worker and you want to build a building and whatnot. And so that is your editing circuit, right? But there's a very clear way that these three circuits are used in real life, right? Well, first of all, before I get to that, let me get to the fourth circuit. There is a fourth circuit. It's the one that underlines all of them. It's the one that is like the root, and these are the three branches, right? all three of these circuits that I've mentioned all connect to this root. They all use this root circuit. This root circuit is the placement circuit. When you are seeing something, or I'll start with the other side. When you're editing something, you are placing it somewhere, right? If you look at the world around you, you see a green field, and you build a skyscraper there in your mind, you are editing the world, building a skyscraper, but you're placing it somewhere. You're putting it in that spot, right? That is not the use of the editing circuit itself, and that is not a creative or a generative circuit. That is simply where you place something. That is simply its context. That is a more fundamental underlying circuit, right? That's why it's this fourth under one. It's the root. In the same way, if you recall something, you recall it in a certain place, right? You can recall the elephant standing in front of you, or you can recall the elephant in the savannah where you first saw it, or you can recall the elephant in your mind's eye, in a blank void, right? Where you place it, again, isn't using the editing circuit. That's part of the, it's not the recall circuit either. It is a fundamental thing that affects all of them. And lastly, with your discovery circuit, when you are looking at things, you're also placing it somewhere, right? You're usually placing it directly in front of you, because you usually discover things, with your senses, right? So your placement circuit interacts with all of these. It is the placement and movement of things. And placing and moving something is not editing / creation / imagination. It is not recall. It is not discovery. It is used with all of these, right? Okay, so with that being said, now we can get to my main point, the main thesis, right? Again, as a recap, the first axiom of fundamental diegesis is that the world is pre-existent, right? The second axiom follows from that, in that the world is immutable to our editing circuit. The editing circuit cannot actually change anything in reality, right? So, let me explain and clarify this. This is the pinnacle point. The way we use these circuits in real life is that we treat our discovery circuit as real. Whatever we see and hear and whatnot is real. We treat our recall circuit as real, at least most of the time, right? We understand that we can have a faulty memory, but generally, we treat our recall circuit as real. Our brain, our experience, everything, we feel comfortable treating both of these things as real in the real world, right? But our editing circuit, everyone knows you cannot treat your editing circuit as real. If you imagine something, if you imagine a skyscraper there, you're not going to start walking up the stairs. You know that the stairs are not actually real. The world is immutable. It is not changeable. It is not influenceable by your editing circuit. The world is immune to your editing circuit. Okay? So therefore, when I am trying to match the real life experience, the real way that we use our circuits, with the fictional game world, aka when I'm trying to achieve fundamental diegesis, I want the circuits to be used in the same way that they are used in the real world. I want my discovery circuit to be, first of all, automatic. I want the GM's descriptions to come to me. I don't want to have to go fish for them or create it in my own head, right? The GM describes something and it automatically pops up as if I was seeing it, as if I was hearing it, right? Instead of, eyesight, I hear description, right? Same thing. It's that automatically creates some kind of image in my head, right? That is the discovery circuit. Immediately afterward, and then, 5 seconds later, or an hour later, or a day later, or a week later, I use my recall circuit to recall that information that was fed to me through my discovery circuit, through the GM's description or art that I saw, etc. Right? But as soon as we go to my editing circuit and we say, we're going to break from reality, we're going to break from the way the real world works, and we are going to allow someone to use their editing circuit to change the world, and then that person gets to treat it as real. That brings up a red flag. Wait a minute, that's not how the real world works. The real world doesn't actually change because of our editing circuit. We only get to rely on our discovery circuit and our recall circuit. We do not actually act on our editing circuit, the imagination, the fictional stuff. And so if we act on that in this fictional world must not be real. You break fundamental diegesis. The real life experience does not match the fictional experience anymore. The fictional experience is using this circuit for something that the real life experience never uses that circuit for. That is the problem. That is the immersion break. You're breaking a fundamental diegesis where we say, this just doesn't match real life. That's not how my brain works. That's not how real life works, etc. So, first axiom is the world is pre-existent, which is why I'm all for what I call high prep, which I don't think I mean what you think I mean by high prep, right? What the 4D crowd says, this is high prep and we don't do it, I don't think that's what I'm doing. I think that's more like railroading and prepping a bunch of encounters and whatnot. I don't do that at all. I say high prep meaning just the world is pre-existent, and I say that I have prepped the world. Anyway, the first axiom is that the world is pre-existent, whether the GM makes it or, a company like mine makes it, etc. And the second axiom is the world is not actually altered by your editing circuit. Or rather, the second axiom is all of these circuits are used in these specific ways. Right? That's a truer thing, right? It's not just pinpointing the editing one. It's saying that the discovery circuit is used like this. It is automatic and it is trustworthy. The recall circuit is used like this. It can be automatic or voluntary, and it is also mostly trustworthy. Right? We know that we can misrecall information, but the editing circuit is only used to imagine what we want to do. It is never actually relied upon as real, just because we have imagined it, right? That's how the real world works. These circuits need to be used that way, and only that way, in order to maintain the feeling of realism, verisimilitude, etc. Right? Those are the two fundamental axioms of fundamental diegesis, and that is what I was trying to communicate. So I hope this did a better job of it. Thank you all for watching. Y'all have a good day. God bless.